for the Oasis gig in Cardiff next year. Okay.
Right. You'd be lucky to get one.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Mate, if I say I'm a friend of Neil Gallagher, right,
Oh,
and go to
Try
Noel,
try
um,
Noel. Yes. Yeah.
oh, they're getting back together, aren't
They
they?
are. Yeah.
Oh,
exactly, which is a bit odd considering they wanted to
Yeah.
kill each other the last
Yeah.
time.
Get one
Uh,
of the early tickets is my advice.
yeah, yeah. Basically, apparently, it's so popular this thing, and it's
Yeah.
right. So we're going to start off with actual King Arthur because one of the things I've been doing on YouTube is that YouTube sort of pushes me to do things, and it's like, right, okay, so I do a daily look at King Arthur, and I do a 1 minute looking at King Arthur every single day, right? So I'll go wandering across my field, and I basically talk about Arthur in Glastonbury, and then King Arthur in Colchester, right? And I got a long way to go about King Arthur,
Mm.
and the one thing about King Arthur is that it's going to be something that's going to crop up in my live shows next year. He's mentioned a couple of times. And what it is today, strangely enough, I discussed the King Arthur of Cumbria, and as we know, Regev,
Yeah.
the kingdom of Regev, and the last battle associated with King Arthur was apparently at along Hadrian's Wall, so um, that would be the one of 12 battles. So he fought in 12 battles. But when it comes back to this whole thing that the name King Arthur is a very popular name,
Mm.
and it's to be seen all over the place. And I mentioned the Arthmail stone in the week as well, which is a stone with a carving on it from Wales, which is near Ogmore, a stone from the 1000s, which is part of a land grant. But it's obviously not the King Arthur of the history that we've mentioned. So I do this regular thing on YouTube if you ever got a chance to look at it. And also I'm looking at weights and measures at this minute. Different weights and measures like the clove and the butt and the coombe. And so we're doing one of these every day as well. So if anyone gets a chance to go over to YouTube, that would be great. So I'd like to start off with mentioning some other things. I spoke to Pete yesterday actually,
uh,
and Pete seemed to he was sounding better.
oh, good.
He said I said to Pete, I said, oh, will we be seeing you again, and he said, yeah, you'll be seeing me again, I don't know when. And I said that everyone passes on their regards except for Roger. And no, I didn't. But I said everyone passes on their regards except for Andy, actually. And he said to say hello to you guys, and he's missing at least David, Margaret, and Drina. Ah,
It's not the same without him, is it?
no, it's not the same. So
No.
so I was looking at my old footage yesterday actually, and we've got a whole well we've got a session next week dedicated to some of the slides that we start off with today, right? And I'm not going to say any more. Next week, I thought I'd dig into the annals and the books a little bit, and I thought we'd go on to Garton Slack, which is associated with Waywang Slack, right? So we're going to do that next week as well. So we've got two subjects we do next week. So we mentioned them partially in passing. And I know some of you have already done it, so I really appreciate that. So your class fees are now due, the usual £50, and that will cover you now for September and October. So get your monies over now. Andy panicked earlier on. He decided to put the money in straight away without me moaning that he hasn't paid the money this month for next month. So remember £50. I don't know a couple of you already paid it, so I really appreciate that. So we're going to go straight. Oh yeah, we haven't done any new stuff. David, any news from you?
No, thank you.
Andy?
Nope. Thanks.
Okay, except for my
The Arthurian stuff, yeah.
yeah, this isn't Arthurian Cup though. This is
What's-
R2D2. Right.
Very nice.
Margaret. Yeah, I decided to use my R2D2 cup. Right. Margaret.
I've just been reading about the Irish Dark Age,
Oh, not them
economic
again.
and cultural stagnation in late prehistoric Ireland, lasting from 100 BC to AD 300. The gap coincided with the Roman empires in Britain and Europe.
Yes.
And they think it was possibly because of large-scale export of slaves to Roman Britain.
Right, hang on a minute. I mean, so there was a deterioration in their temperature in society and exported a load of slaves,
It was, they call it
including
the
redheads
Irish
like me.
Dark Age, between 100 BC to AD 300, when the Romans were here
Yeah.
in Europe, and nothing was heard or nothing was happening. There was an economic and cultural stagnation during that period, and it was during the time that the Roman Empire was had taken over Europe and Britain. And they reckon it was because they were exporting slaves from there, so there wasn't the manpower.
Or the female power. You know what the Irish are like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, fair enough. Oh, and talking about Rome, that's one image we'll be looking at in a moment, and I'll tell you all about that. Drina.
No news, not this week.
Right, and also I was really excited on Monday. I thought you'd be able to get your copies of A Lissig Pillar by today, and you could actually say that you've actually got your Lissig Pillar for this month. Unfortunately, after trying to get hold of the bank to moan and groan about why a certain donation hasn't appeared in the account, I realised there's a bank holiday, so these didn't go in a post office yesterday. Yeah. I gave the bank a right mouthful over the answer phone, and I realised they were closed. So that's on its way. That is on its way, and there's a couple of people saying hi. So there's 3 people saying hi online. Oh my God, we got Squirrel, Sniper, Mr. Wood, and JP. So there you go. They're all saying hello. Good. Right. So I got to go on to the images now, and right. Let's just crack on to the images. And I spent a few hours today in a museum, looking at 2 artifacts, and we'll see one of them in a few moments. So, well, we'll see an image of one of them in a few moments, and that's all, because I've got to keep some good stuff for my live show, and it's not that. So we've got all these images here, and let's look. We're not looking at that yet. I'm going to start off with basically. I was looking at my computer, and I got some stuff online that they want me to talk about, so we'll do that in a few moments. And we're going to be looking at next week. We'll be looking at a proper subterranean house with my images, and I'll be explaining what the subterranean house means and what discussion we can have with it. And to give you an idea of this building that we're going to look at next week, there's my my 2 stepchildren as they were tiny standing up in there. But then again, adults really couldn't stand up in there. And it's underground, and it's a wonderful structure. This is in Orkney. And again, next week is going to be sort of a bit of Iron Age stuff up north and a little bit of Iron Age stuff in Yorkshire. So I just thought I'd sort of bring you into that as I've got the slides in front of me. And these little holes in the wall, right, is very, very interesting, this, because the architecture underground and the corbelling and the lintel slab furniture that you've got in there and all the props and stuff, but in the wall they've left spaces that go into the earth, like hollows in the wall, in the masonry. They've just like left spaces like little niches, but it goes into the earth. Now, what are they about? So we're going to look at that next week. Now, this itself is a chain, and I used this device, and everything went onto the other device, and this is actually a gold chain that was found in 1817 in West Wales alongside an absolutely beautiful brooch. And I'm going to be very unfair to you guys. If you want to see the beautiful brooch, you've got to go along to my live shows. But anyway, so I took a photograph of that, and we're going to have a big one, and hopefully I can sort of let you in on that in the near future. But it was absolutely brilliant going into a museum, and it was great having purple archivist gloves. Andy, these purple archivist gloves are unbreakable, absolutely wonderful. I've kept them. But it was great seeing it. Sometimes when you got research to do and you're able to actually see the actual artifacts themselves, it's so absolutely amazing. So one person, JP, they're saying, just got in and jumped on your live stream. No doubt, King Arthur had battles all over the place. There's a lot of Lothian in the tales. Yeah, fair enough. Somebody's saying, got back from Madrid today. Wish I could share photos of Tartaria. Well, Mr. Wood, you've got my email address. And those that are really interested in places like Tartaria, folks, right? That might be a lecture in the near future. And if none of you have ever heard of Tartaria, look it up. It's a lost civilization in Europe that wasn't around too many years ago, and its sort of sense of existence has been erased from history. So it's well looking at that. And then one of them are mentioning online as well. The talk last week about Stonehenge made me think about flood lines. Does Tartaria and mud flood always go together? Not being funny, that's a genuine question. What's this about mud floods? And obviously more about King Arthur there. So we'll keep on adding that into the lecture today. Oh, and I don't know if this is another little personal story. I've got a column in my local newspaper, and I'm getting desperate for material. I'm like on my 168th column, and it's about standing buildings in a barren district area in South Wales. I went around this corner, right, and I just thought I'll go down this lane, right, and I saw this, and it's like this coach house, which is from the late 1700s. It's a beautiful structure. And I thought, you look, don't you, Andy, and you go down lanes and places, and suddenly you see things that you've never seen in your entire life, except you've lived there 40 or 50 years. It's always good going down those lanes. Right, talking about going down lanes, I would like to get directly onto the wonders of Maiden Castle. Now, I know we've mentioned Maiden Castle. We've mentioned it here, there, and everywhere. And I thought that Maiden Castle is a site that you can't avoid doing a lecture on it. You've got to eventually say, right, we're gonna do a discussion on Maiden Castle, and this is what we're going to be doing. So what we're going to do, we'll mention Sir Mortimer Wheeler and his excavations at Maiden Castle as we go through. We've got lots of little plans, and to get an idea where Maiden Castle, there it is. It's in the area of Dorset, so can't say any more than that. Now, Maiden Castle is one of those super bank and ditch sites in Britain. And Maiden Castle, because Castos, as in fortified area, it's sort of come down from the Romans. Castos, Maiden, Castos, the castle on the hill, Maiden, and there's, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a Maiden Castle in Cumbria, and there's also other Maiden castles across Britain. So it's good to get sort of into the flow. Archaeologists that are excavated at Maiden Castle are some of the very famous archaeologists, including Augustus Pitt Rivers. Yes, that's a name we haven't come across for a while, is it, Margaret, when we were looking at those mound diggers? Mortimer Wheeler and Tessa Wheeler as well, and ownership is English Heritage. Now, the site itself, you'll be surprised with some of the contents today, even though we've mentioned it, right? And interestingly enough, Margaret, would this site have been a scheduled protection ancient monument, before 1950 or after 1950? Go on, Margaret.
After.
Yes, 1981. It became a protected scheduled ancient monument in 1981, when the likes of Stonehenge has been protected for over 100 years, and loads of other sites, even Castlereagh, had got its protection. But Maiden Castle, scheduled ancient monument in 1981. I find that unbelievable that it wasn't protected before. Now, looking at this, the LiDAR itself speaks volumes. It tells us so much. And what it does tell us is that you can see this earlier site over here, and you can see a mound going across the site. I know we mentioned this. I know we probably mentioned this last week, but again, we're going to go into this in detail. So let's look at. Oh, by the way, Maiden Castle in Cumbria. And so what we're going to do, we're going to chuck this on you, nice little one, and the earliest archaeological evidence of human activity goes over to number 1, right? And goes over to number 1, probably not 2,400 years BC, but 3,000 or maybe 4,000 years BC, 6,000 years ago, right? So this is what we're talking about. Causewayed enclosures, as we know, you're talking about that sort of string of sausages effects. There's a little bit of a tump, and on the side of the hill, you'd put a ditch, a space in between, a ditch, sort of a concentric circle, and inside you've got a sky burial location. Now, when we think about this site and the importance of this site, and I'm reminded of something that's actually JP's actually put online. Can you remember, guys, when I think Margaret and Drina were into this discussion? Can you remember when we were actually talking about these types of sites, and we were talking about flooding, right? And you're thinking, well, Maiden Castle isn't actually high up. It's sort of it's not hugely sort of prominent like some of these other sites. And you're thinking that we've had floods. You know, we've had massive. Can you remember those floods in Somerset about a decade and a bit ago, right? The entire landscape was flooded, right? And people had houses and they had sort of banks around them and stuff in the middle of nowhere and those types of things. And this idea that again, I keep saying this idea that these banks and ditches around them are always about defense needs to be challenged. It really, really needs to be challenged. So again, when we're thinking about this type of site, you know, we're thinking about, you know, site 1, and we're thinking about site 2. If we ignore what it's got at the bottom, some people, and this is actually written by an archaeologist quite some years ago, so things have changed. So some believe that there were 2 hillocks, a hillock at 1, which is clearly indicated on there, and a hillock at 2, and somewhere along the line they become joined together. But whether that's fact or fiction, we don't know. There's one thing that we do know, that across number 2 there's a bank barrow. So something must have existed at number 2 for there to have been a bank barrow. You know, possibly 5, maybe 6,000 years ago, associated with the Causewayed enclosure site. But we don't really know that. So again, when we think of this, when we think about how this site goes and how this site sort of develops, and we sort of tantalizingly think, and Maiden Castle itself, when they're really starting to build the banks and ditches around this site, right? Ignoring the dates down below, they're starting to really develop this, right? It's not an overtly impressive site, but what's really happening, and again, my dates are slightly different from these in front. What's really happening, roughly about 450 years BC, number 3, they put these massive banks and ditches around it. And somewhere around 100 years BC, people are starting to abandon the site. So things are really strangely going on at this site. And this is what's happening 450 years BC. These banks and ditches, you can, you know, I don't know I don't know if you've been to some of these sites and you've been really depressed by the fact that there's nothing impressive there. Well, Maiden Castle is an understatement. It's more than impressive. You know, it's really impressive. It's more impressive than you can ever imagine, and it's well worth a visit. It really is. So Maiden Castle itself, the inside area is at least 50 acres in scale. It's one of the largest type sites in Europe, and when we think about what's going on, and I think the key issue with these sites and the key question is, and I've mentioned this for the past few weeks, is that when the 2 points. One point is that historians used to argue that these places were defended against the Romans, and in 90% of the cases they definitely weren't, because most of them had already been abandoned by AD 43, right? And so that's the first point, and obviously the second point is why are these people moving away from these sites when you get to the time of the birth of Christ, when it's supposedly a period in the Iron Age where there's a mass period of warfare, and maybe that idea might not be the case anymore as we start to analyze history a lot more clearer. So if we keep looking at these images and we try to get an idea of the gravity and impressive nature of this landscape. Now, one thing we're going to go forward with as well, one thing we're going to mention, right, and is that when we grasp and when we understand the huge amount of effort that's gone into creating these sites and over a long period of time. So when archaeologists are talking, these banks and ditches were constructed on a Wednesday afternoon. These things were added to, right? These things were extended. Things were brought in, soils were brought in, and one thing that I'm reminded of with something like Maiden Castle being such a huge site, being a 50-acre site inside without the banks and ditches around the outside, right? Is that one thing I'm reminded of? I don't know if you guys can remember, maybe part of a talk I gave about Brinksworth Church. It's an Anglo-Saxon church in the northeast of England, and Brinksworth itself is a fascinating site, and it's a site that was built using material from different parts of a 10-mile radius. So basically, people's contributions to this site, this Brinksworth Church, in the post-Roman period, was that they would have material from a Roman site, and they would take it in carts and take it to Brinksworth to be used. And then another community say, right, this is our contribution, and they'd bring it in. This is our contribution, they'd bring it. This is our contribution, bring it in. Maybe Maiden Castle is like that. Anyway, the other point I wanted to make is this tribal name thingamajig, right? When you look at maps of Britain, what you usually see is tribes like the Catavalani, the Iceni tribe, the Trinovanti tribe, the Jabuni tribe, all these tribes gone. But one of the tribal names, these were the Judatrigi tribal people in Dorset. Now, lots of these tribal names are actually names that are awarded to them by the Romans. So in other words, they go into an area, they really can't understand what people are talking about, and they say, well, call you these names. But some of the names of these people are actually names that these people would have called themselves. And that's a really interesting point. Maybe they saw themselves represented as a certain type of people, but it was a name that stuck in the Roman period. When we look at this site, and we'll go through all these images again. When we look at this site, one of the things that's really interesting is that after the site is abandoned and is no longer being used, and Roman era civilization starts to take hold in Britain, is that what we're finding is sometimes the Romans build um, a temple at Maiden Castle. They actually build a typical temple at Maiden Castle sometime in about the 360s, which you could say is quite late in the Roman world in Britain, but it's within the last 100 years of Roman era sense of perspective in Britain. And they build a temple here, and other temples are actually built here as well. And Andy, it's interesting you mention King Arthur, and I mentioned King Arthur, because sometime around the period of King Arthur in the 500s, Andy, um, this site is almost completely abandoned for a while, right? But people are still here. There's evidence of people here up until the 500s, but then the site's more or less abandoned for quite some time into the medieval period. And it ties in with this sort of this place, and yeah, we'll look at them and whether that's right or wrong. And again, looking at this now, one of the things that's very much lost when you talk about these sites, and in particular Maiden Castle, and it is an amazing picture. One of the things that we miss about these sites is what they mean to the local people. So many times do we excavate these sites and we think, wow, look at the banks and ditches, look at the Roman temple that we've seen, look at the entrances, look at what Sir Mortimer Wheeler told us, and all these other things, right? Look at the aerial views, look at this spectacular picture. But one thing that we do miss is what the local people thought about these places, right? And it's almost as if what we do see is that they're pre-Roman era sites. A little bit of abandonment. In the Roman era, some of these sites come back into their own, like Hod Hill, where they build a fort directly into one corner of it, right? We discussed that. And then a temple's built at Maiden Castle. Equally, I can tell you about a site in South Wales called Dinas Powys. And Dinas Powys is a very strange site because in the Iron Age, there was no banks and ditches around this hillock. But by the time they get into the late Roman era, into the 400s, 500s, they start putting banks and ditches around it, right? So it's almost as if these people have a connection with these earthworks. And when David's always going to regret saying this, when we looked at Silbury Hill down by the West Ken at Longbarrow, David said it's a pile of earth. Yeah, it is a pile of earth, David. You're completely correct. But that pile of earth, David, like this site at Maiden Castle, are massively important events for these people. They meant something. They put a lot of effort into creating these things. A bit like Stonehenge, a bit like the pyramids, David. These things are moments in human history. They're connections. They're voices within human history. What I've actually got is a little bit of a treat for you. I've actually got a Maiden Castle 3D model video, which we can actually have a quick look at. Hopefully, this is gonna happen, right? So if I can get to my thingy here, and we can go to there. Hopefully, I can play this, right? This is 3D imaging of Maiden Castle. Hang on, if I can do that, play. Isn't that absolutely great? Right, so it's just spinning around. It's just spinning around, and you've got the sense of the two sets of entrances, and they're definitely starkly different, and it's almost as if it's a celebration within the landscape. Oh, come on! I tell you what. Let's just check that in again. I don't think I can actually slow it down. But let's just put that on again. Just another little time. Hang on. Just keep that going. I think this is absolutely fascinating that we've actually got this technology. This is LiDAR technology, which archaeologists are talking about. And with LiDAR technology, the way LiDAR technology works is that if there's any buildings there, if there's any trees there, the LiDAR just cuts through everything and just gives you a 3D image of this amazing piece of landscape. And again, when you think about it, the landscape of the place of Maiden Castle is a place that's been created by human beings. Again, it's got that sort of it's got that very clear link with the likes of Silbury Hill. You know, that's a completely man-made thing. And it's all that sense of connection. And to give you an idea of perspective again, what we've got is the bottom part of the screen is south. Then you've got the eastern entrance on the right hand side, and the western entrance on the left hand side, and obviously looking north. And that sort of gives you a clear idea and a clear sense of where you are in the landscape. And there's other things in the landscape as well. If you look further on up at the screen, there's little pimples, little bronze age bits of evidence, and again, this sort of shapes our connection with the past, knowing that they had a connection with the past. Remember that they saw history probably the same way as we did. There's stuff over there that we don't really understand. I've no idea what it is, right? Maybe somebody's buried over there, or there's another thing over there. We don't know what. There's a ditch over there as well. There's a really old tree. We don't really know what that's about. And these discussions in the past, discussions that we have today, you know, nothing has really changed on that account. And it keeps all of these things keep adding to this very rich culture that we call British archaeology. So if we go back to where we were a few moments ago, and if we go off the share and we go back to the other images, and I think looking at these images and trying to just focus on this one site, and again looking at that. So the big question is, such a site that they've spent a long time creating, they just abandoned. Maiden Castle has been an inspiration, has been a huge inspiration for lots of writers, even authors such as Thomas Hardy, and John Ireland, who's actually a composer. And it's an archetypal site. It's something that you always say in your history lessons. And one thing that I will say, and this is what happens. There's been times in British history that people have been interested in Roman sites. There's been times in British history that people have been interested in medieval deserted villages. There's been times that people have been interested in standing stones and stone circles. There was in the 30s a time that people were digging these sites because they wanted to know what they were talking about. And in the 1800s, you had Augustus Pitt Rivers, who was excavating here as well. But Sir Mortimer Wheeler, inspired, and it gave us inspiration with Tessa Wheeler as well, undertook big scale archaeological excavations at Maiden Castle. And these raised the profile of archaeology, the importance of these sites, and were able to assist us with a narrative. And this is very, very important. This whole thing is really, really important to sort of help us with our interest. You know, trying to make history and archaeology interesting is something that we all try to do as archaeologists. We all try to sort of, we also try to sort of say, you know, look, this is this, and these banks, you know, let's be interested in this. And it's been excavated by the other archaeologists like Neil Sharples, if anyone's actually ever come across this. So if we go back to the images and try to understand, and this is a little plan of the excavations. The red areas are the places that they've excavated. And let me say, folks, right, they have, they may be big excavations, but they haven't excavated a lot, have they? So the area on the right-hand side, we've got a really good idea that the area on the right-hand side probably does date to at least 6,000 years ago. And again, there's a connection with when this was a Neolithic site, right? And the reason why these people have got a connection with when this was a Neolithic site is because the bits that show this is a Neolithic site haven't really gone away. Right, as you can see, that there is the early Neolithic archaeology, and it's not really gone away. It's still there. It's almost as if the people knew when they were extending this site, making it bigger, right? They almost knew as if there was something there, right? There was something intensely symbolic about what had gone on before. And I've been saying this, I have mentioned this before, that you get Iron Age sites, and there's like a oh God, I can't remember the example of it. I can't remember which one, but we were looking at HILLFORT not so long ago, and I remember saying, look, you've got these Bronze Age barrows around by the entranceways, and in front of the entranceways, but instead of clearing them, they left them there. And it's just thinking, right, so they respected things that had gone on before. And when you stand to talk about defense, having things in the way of your line of sight means that the enemy can hide around behind them. So you're leaving Bronze Age archaeology, which if this is a defensive site, would jeopardize what you're trying to do. But for some reason, they're leaving these things there, and I think this is really, really powerful. Now, when we do look at this site, what we do know, and from the underlying geology, is that this is a site that is constructed basically out of chalk, right? Chalk and earth, chalk, earth, and sods, right? So you can imagine as these people are digging into the earth and getting deeper and deeper to dig out their ditches, that must have been quite amazing, right? These banks and ditches would have looked polished alongside the surrounding landscape, and slowly but surely the grass itself would grow up and down these banks and ditches. It's almost as if we're digging out the bowels of the earth to sort of create the effect of these white chalky banks and ditches, and essentially Mother Nature starts to sort of take over, sort of green these banks. So when we start to think, and we start to understand, and we start to go back on this site, and we think again, hang on, if we can get a better image, and we try to, hang on, just sort of go. I think that's not the better one. Let's just sort of go back a bit. I'm trying to get the best. Yeah, that seems to show it better more than anything. So what we've got is that this site goes through lots of phases, right? So we've mentioned the Neolithic stuff. We've mentioned where the Neolithic causeway enclosure site would have been in this area, right? We've mentioned that, and what they are saying is that sometime, possibly, so if the causeway enclosure site, which would have been here, right, there may have been something over here, we're not sure, but definitely causeway enclosure site dated back 6,000 years ago, sometime into the 3,000, the 5,500 or the 5,400, whenever that happens, right, the causeway enclosure site is shut down. right? Nobody is taking their loved ones and placing them on pyres, not pyres, four posters and exposing the bodies and then collecting the bones, putting them in the ditches. And sometimes they abandoned doing that because they were placing their bodies elsewhere, right? But then what happened is sometime along the line they built this bank barrow which goes up and down here, right? Which is a 600-meter long bank, right? With a slight ditch on either side, right? It's a bank. It's just a long tapering bank, right? And this is really, really strange. And it's really, really strange because the bank itself is still there today. They didn't flatten it, they left it there. So it's almost as if as the generations go by, they've got evidence of the causeway enclosure ditches going back 6,000 years ago. They've got this bank here. And if we go onto an aerial view, we can probably see these things a little bit better. Okay, let's just go there. And if we go there again, this is a lot more clearer. You can see the bank running across there, right? And again, you can see the ditches of the causeway enclosure, right? Now, when we think about this contextual link, right? This site has been incredibly used for varying different things. One minute it's used for burial, next minute it's used for a site of the ancestors, next minute it's used for farming, next used temporarily for habitation, next minute it's used for storing food, next minute it's abandoned, next minute there's a Roman temple on there, you know, all these different things. So there's a lot going on at this unbelievably wonderful site. So we've got it's in a way a little bit like Stonehenge in that Stonehenge begins its life at the same time. That's the point. Stonehenge is a site that also has a causewayed enclosure there, right? Stonehenge goes back at least 6,000 years ago, right? And then that develops into a stone circle site. Well, this develops Maiden Castle, that develops into something completely different. You know, it goes off the scale, and it's just when it goes off the scale in the sense that when there are special places in Britain, people use them over and over and over again. It's a bit like modern day society. You know, the Romans see that there's potential in London, right? So in other words, they narrow the River Thames and they start to build up quays and they start to build up banks and start to sort of develop the landscape. And now London's a place that has been used since the Roman times, right? York's very similar to that. In a history, we have popular places, and what made Maiden Castle popular were probable things that we don't really rightly understand today, but they were important to the people in the past. Now, when we do think about these landscapes, it's a bit like standing on the Cairngorms, or it's a bit like standing in the Fells, or it's a bit like standing in Derbyshire or the Grampians and looking out and there's like nothing. But one time there were trees, one time there were farming, one time there were people, right? So we have a different way of looking at the past, but these people had a different way of looking at the landscape as well. But they lived amongst their past. They lived with and amongst their past. And it's almost as if they'd gone through so much effort that they didn't want this site. They didn't want this site to disappear within the view of their memories. Now, we do know at one stage. Okay, let's just move on again. We do know at one stage that we've got the Bronze Age, and as I say, we mentioned this before. In the Bronze Age, we've got 3,000 years ago, and then suddenly they wanted to put banks and ditches around their sites, right? So somewhere from about 3,000 years ago, 2,700 years ago, right? The reason for there was some kind of emergence of change. People wanted to build these things. It's been argued. Defensive sites in response to invasion from continental Europe, built by the invaders, or a military reaction to social tensions caused by an increasing population resulting in pressure on agriculture, or were they due to a problem to do with flooding? Were they to do with status? And all these different things have sort of come up. Since the 1960s, the dominant view has been that the increasing use of iron led to social changes in Britain. Deposits of iron ore were located in different places to the tin, and in different places to the copper, and in different places to stone and various other things. As a result, trading patterns shifted, and the old ways of trading had changed, and maybe these were a result of that. Maybe that's another idea. Maybe this is what these sites were for. But what we're going to do, we're going to read out a quote, and you can see how huge these sites are. This is the that's that entranceway. So this is the western. This is the western entrance. You can see how big these entrances are because those are sheep. Those ain't little fleas. Those are sheep. You can get an idea. They're massive. Yeah, huge, massive. So this is what Barry Cunliffe says. He's one of those writers. If you've got one of the books in the library, Margaret, Barry Cunliffe. So archaeologist Barry Cunliffe believes that population increase still played a role and has stated the following. This is what Barry Cunliffe says. If any can get a book by him, he's really into his prehistory, top class archaeologist. He says, these locations, right, here we go, provided defensive possibilities for the community at those times when the stress of an increasing population burst out into open warfare. But I wouldn't see them as having been built because there was a state of war. So 1 minute he's saying one thing, and the next minute he's actually disagreeing with himself and actually saying the archaeological evidence tells us something else. They would be functional as defensive strongholds when there were tensions, and undoubtedly some of them were attacked and destroyed. As I said, small number were. But this was not the only or even the most significant factor in their construction. So everything that I've been saying as an archaeologist myself has been agreed with by another archaeologist, Barry Cunliffe. Now, we've mentioned there's a significant number of hill forts in Dorset, at least 35, and there's other ones as well. And the archaeologist Neil Sharples, the archaeologist mentioned before, he's done some excavation work here as well. He says, after he'd undertaken the excavations at Maiden Castle, he said that he believed that hill forts were used to control agricultural land to support a large community. Those in Dorset were situated near expanses of fertile land. So, Margaret, your community, you have a hill fort. Andy's community, he has a hill fort. David's community, he has a hill fort. Adrina just wanders around going between each one with her iron metal working skills. Monumental defences such as the ditch at Maiden Castle indicate that the land was disputed and communities fought each other for control. Do I agree with that? No. Maybe that's what Barry Cunliffe is saying. This is supported by Barry Cunliffe, who argues that the elaborate earthworks, as the entrance there, the elaborate earthworks were used to defend the weakest part of the hill fort. They increased the time the attackers took to reach the gateway, which would have left them vulnerable to defenders armed with slings. Hordes of carefully selected sling stones have been found at both sites. Now, that's really interesting because we come back to Dave. When Dave pointed this out, when we did the Bronze Age stuff, we were talking about Bronze Age hordes. I know this is another period, but not too far away from the Iron Age. We were talking about Bronze Age hordes. And I think Dave mentioned, well, if you've got a horde buried over there with all these things, and if there's something going wrong, you can go to the horde and then you're ready for warfare. I think that's what David meant, or that's what was interpreted, right? Is in a way these hill forts like that they built these things that they were never ever used. Most of them were never ever used in conflict. Maybe they're just a way of saying, but it's a big white elephant. You know, a lot of earth has gone into these things, and when I say it's a big white elephant, a lot of work has gone into these things, only for them to be abandoned. Right? Can you remember the Millennium Dome projects, guys? I think you do. And the Millennium Dome is still being used today. But after they had built the Millennium Dome, right, they were gonna demolish it, and there was a public outcry, and people were saying, "Well, hang on a minute, all this money has gone into making the Millennium Dome, and it's not going to be used for anything. We're going to demolish it. That's absolutely terrible, right? You can't do that." Hill forts are different. When you've piled up a load of earth, it doesn't really go away. Millennium Dome would have, because somebody had set light to it, and the whole thing would have collapsed as a different type of building. But it's the same type of concept, right? It's a very similar type of concept. Maiden Castle itself sits right on the north side of a valley, but a low-lying valley, and there's a river nearby, but not exactly there. You know, it's not exactly at this locality. So if we go back to let's just put the Ordnance Survey map on there. You can get the contour lines there. So what you've got on the eastern side, okay, mentions Roman temple. On the eastern side, basically, my notes, it says 132 meters above sea level. It says 134 there. And that's the highest point of the landscape, right? That's the highest point. And so when you think about these, and the ditches, right, the surviving ditches, from the base of the ditch to the top today, not when they were back then, is 8.5 meters. Some of these banks and ditches are 8.5 meters deep, right? And there's several of them, multivalent. There's more of them, as we know. You know, absolutely stunning. You know, there's just they just stick out. They're just unbelievable. And what we think with some of these is when you get to the top of the banks, they may have had a rampart. They may have had timber arrayed on the top of these banks. Now, we don't know that for sure in lots of cases, because I don't understand. I can't really do the maths on this, right? But when you think about it, right? When you think about it, it's to walk around the whole top of this, you're talking about over 1,000 meters, right? 1,000 meters, right? If you're thinking about having a rampart, a wooden rampart on the top of this, right? That's a hell of a lot of wood, and that's a hell of a lot of trees. Do you really need that? That's the question. Do you really, really need that? And when we start to think about this, and when we start to sort of array our minds and mindset sets with the amount of material going into this, and also, guys, right, think about this, right? When this was completed, you know, all the banks and ditches, you know, final form, whatever you want to call it, 2,400 years ago. Remember this. If you put timber, if you organize timber all the way along there, right? Yeah. There's no point putting it here, right? If you arrange timber all the way along here, right? And you want this site to look like that for hundreds of years, you're going to have to replace the timber on a regular basis. The ramparts are going to need to be replaced on a regular basis. Andy was talking earlier on about, you know, buildings and rotting and timber and all the rest of it, right? This timber was not protected by a roof. it may have been sprayed, not sprayed. It may have been coated with ochres, and they may have been able to put some waterproof on the outside, right? But this timber was exposed to the rains when they came down 24/7, right? And what we know from Roman era Britain, which was obviously come along way after these sites were abandoned, right? We know that the Romans would build their timber barracks. They would rebuild them every 7 years, or less than that, or maybe every 10 years, right? But usually Roman barracks were usually completely rebuilt after less than a decade. And they had roofs on them because of the damp conditions that we live in. So every few years, every 10, 15 years, whatever, the ramparts would need to be completely replaced. And that's a lot of timber. It really, really is. So when archaeologists talk about these sites, it's that we need to think about practicalities. We really need to think about the practicalities. Again, that is the western entrance. It's unbelievable. Hugely unbelievable. Whenever you go to the site, you're amazed with the sense of double, triple, quadruple entrances, and there's more than one site in Britain that has these very interesting, complex arrangements of entrances, right? And this is what we're thinking, and this is what we're talking about. Now, initially what happens is this isn't, this is 2,400 years ago, but initially 2,600 years ago, the site was naturally developing on this side, and then it would develop here, and they would extend the banks and ditches, right? So developing the site here. So we think that the ditches were quite shallow initially, and the banks above them were quite sort of, were 2-3 meters high. But there's something else we need to bring into the mix, which isn't always discussed, right? So where that red dot is there, that's the other entranceway. This is the original entranceway, right, before they extended it, right? This is really interesting, right? That they weren't happy with just earthen banks, and they weren't just happy 2,600 years ago with wooden ramparts. They actually brought to the site limestone to clad the outside of the earthen chalky ramparts at the site. And why this is very odd. It's very, very odd. It's very, very odd why they do that, right? But it might be because they thought, right, what we're going to do, we're going to use limestone because it lasts longer. The banks last longer, and the wood rots away, but the stone doesn't, right? And maybe we can make this site look a lot more impressive. So they're bringing this limestone to the site, right? And the limestone is traveling 2 miles to the site. So they're bringing material into the site. They're really changing this site, and they're really altering the site. But what that means, we don't know, because this is basically an earthen type site. This is, we would think this is just earthen banks and ditches, but initially they're adding stone to it. They're actually bringing it onto the site, which is absolutely amazing. So the site extends sometime around 2,400 years ago, right, to a site that's only 16 acres. It extends over the whole place. So it's now up to 50 acres in area, right? And this makes this site, and alongside many other sites in Britain, a period of hill fort building. They're building hill forts basically all over Britain, right? We've got hill forts all over Britain. Now, 5,000 of them. And those are the ones that we know about. There may have been hundreds, if not 1,000 more across Britain. So this is a period that everyone's building these things. Now, what we do see, we see this a lot in British history. There's crazes in British history. We've seen it. We've seen it in the Neolithic period. One minute they're building causewayed enclosures everywhere. Then the next minute they're building these weird burial chambers at the end of the Neolithic period, and then you've got the Bronze Age coming in, and you've got mining everywhere, and you've got these stone circles and so on, and then somewhere in the Bronze Age they got mounds everywhere. They got these thousands of mounds across Britain, and then in the Iron Age you got these huge developed hill forts. These expansive developed hill forts. This is the emergence of developed hill forts. Has been attributed to Iron Age society becoming more complex. It's a complex society, right? So one thing that we do in history and archaeology, one thing that we do in archaeology, we always associate complexity with defense and warfare, right, or religion, right, and that's very, very dangerous. And it's very, very dangerous because we've got a moment in history that goes against the grain of that. Leading up to the First World War, we had developed planes. We got the motor car. We've got ships that can 4-funnel ships that, as long as they don't hit icebergs, they can go across the Atlantic Ocean. We're starting to develop telecommunication. Not so long afterwards, we got radio. All these things are developing. If the First World War had never happened, we would have probably been on the moon in the 1950s or 60s anyway, right? Then you could argue that the Second World War goes against that we developed jet planes and rockets and V2s and all the rest of it, right? And that was a response to warfare, right? But I think in many ways, what we've got to do, we've got to look at these wonderful sites, these enigmatic sites, and we've got to see that this is a response to a complex society, a complex need to demonstrate something, to equip yourself with greatness, as the Greek, not the Greek writer, the ancient Chinese writer wrote about, I think it was 300 years BC, Mencius. Mencius wrote, in success, to share one's principles with the people, in failure, to live them out alone. These I call the qualities of a great man. And I just remembered that, right? And that is what we're talking about history. In none of that does it say warfare. But what it does say is human aspirations, the emergence of creating these great monuments, and the Romans leaving a sign on these great monuments, and maybe some people living there, maybe some people keeping their grain here, maybe these are everything, right? These are everything. Because when we excavate these sites, there's so much information at them that we can't basically say that the same information tells us the same story in Cumbria as the same information tells us of a hill fort in Dorset, as a hill fort that we might find in Ireland. It's all principally for the same reasons. I know full well that where I live, you don't need me to tell you, I built my own house. It's round, but it's on stilts, but it's built directly beyond a hedge, right? And we're surrounded with trees because it's windswept on the other sides. Now, if it wasn't beyond a hedge, we would have lost our roof by now, right? And they, from the archaeological evidence, are showing houses behind a bank. So these people are thinking more in a complex way. Is the emergence of one dominant hill fort in an area indicates the inhabitants of particular hill fort became more important than their contemporaries? Is this true? Is this not? Is it to do with warfare, or is it to do with what people did? Right? They had the ability to build an amazing, powerful, complex site here. But then again, Hambledon Hill isn't too far away, right? And when we excavate these sites, right, when we excavate them, and there's so much being written online, and there's lots of information being written online, which is great. Really appreciate that. That that I might read some of these out before the break, so that'll be good. If we go and welcome everybody who's joining us tonight as well. If again, I'm loving these images. I'm loving the sense, and maybe if we're challenged by this entranceway and we're looking at this entranceway, sometimes we see what we see, right? There's a general dearth of evidence for destruction, and an increase of artifacts associated with crafts and industry suggests that the reason for change was economic. Are these sites economic places? Are these places? We've got to do this because we're creating things. We're creative people. These sites are creative. That entranceway is creative. It's like a maze. It's like the Hampton Court maze. These things are creative. They're projecting a message. They're vocalizing within these earthworks. If we take away what we're seeing and we go to North America, we look at the mound builders of North America, right? And we say, right, some of these mound builder peoples of North America, the Mississippi Delta and so on, you might think that they've got the mounds because it means that when the Mississippi the banks break, right, and then there's the annual flood, that people are living on the mounds, right? They're not going to be washed away, right? Nobody's saying that those mounds are defensive. And it's very difficult for me to say, it's very difficult for me to say that these things that look defensive are not defensive, right? But then again, why not? Maybe I could say that. Maybe it's a possibility, right? Multi-vallet hill forts, ramparts and ditches. Maiden Castle were excessive for defence alone, so were likely used as a statement of power and authority. Is that the same meaning as defence? Developed hill forts were generally densely occupied. Were they? Some show that they weren't. Some show that they were only partially occupied. So the problem is, whenever I see an illustration like this, it makes me feel sick because it doesn't make sense. Because some of these sites show lots of evidence of buildings, but buildings that were used over 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 years, right? So therefore they were spread around the place, and not necessarily, if they don't have water, yeah, the hygiene is going to be absolutely terrible. Disease is going to be spreading. These people, who's going to look after their fields? Who's going to look after their animals? Who's going to look after their crops? If they're living here, if you cannot produce enough food if you're all living here. It just doesn't make sense. This is why I keep knocking this out the water. Barry Cunliffe states that the Maiden Castle monumental defences probably indicate that it was of a higher status than other developed hill forts. But maybe that's what they wanted to do. Maybe that's what they wanted us to see, right? Maybe that's the connection with the world. They wanted us to they wanted us to see something. You know, they wanted us to allow um, an expansion of their thoughts with building these powerful sites. You know, I would love to say, I would love to think that, you know, these are for defense, but then again, it just doesn't seem to make sense when you look at the back of these sites. When you see the reverse of these sites, and the archaeological excavation evidence that we see from the likes of Sir Mortimer Wheeler, when you look at the eastern defences for the entranceway, they're a little bit more flimsy than the defences on the western side. Now, the big question is, right, if you're going to attack this site, let's just bring Margaret in here. I'm going to bully Margaret a minute, right? Margaret, without saying any more, right? If you knew that there was 300 people defending this, Margaret, right, and you know how big it is, yeah, and you had 200 people to attack it, where would you attack, Margaret?
Where would I
North,
attack if I was one of the 200 attacking 300?
Yeah,
Where would I attack?
you know,
Which is the weak point?
well, the point is that the 300 people are going to have to be spread out around the entire circuit at the top of the site.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So you see the problem with the methodology in such a big site. If you've got a big site like this, right, the bigger the site, the more vulnerable it is, right? And that's the problem, right? So the eastern side, that's the eastern entrance and the western entrance, right? Are you going to attack the western entrance? The answer is no, because it's too elaborate, right? And also on the eastern side, right, it's a little bit more flatter, right? When you go there, you see it. It's like, oh, this is the place to actually attack, right? So it's almost as if one side is like for show and the other side is like, you know, this is where the tradesmen come in, right? And the point I'm trying to make is am I right? Okay, everything I've said, Margaret, right? Am I trying to prove the theory that these are not just about defense, right? Am I just pushing it and pushing it? I don't think I am, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to allow people to see the problems with what they're seeing and what people are saying about these sites. Because one thing I used to say years ago, right, when I used to believe the Vespasian thing, so Vespasian came here with the Second Augustan Legion, right, and as I used to say this, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. As he's heading towards Dorchester, which becomes the Roman capital of the area, which is just which is a stone throw from here, right? I used to say that, okay, yeah. Then he saw the site and basically he found out that if he attacked around the back, you'd be able to capture the site just like that, right? That's what I used to say. And then it used to be based on Sir Mortimer Wheeler's evidence to see there's military a burial ground at the back, right? But no matter what way you look at it, it didn't make any sense because the site had already been abandoned by the time Vespasian even got here, right? So it's trying to tie in with understanding these sites. And sometimes when you wish to understand these sites, there are more questions than answers. So what we're going to do, we're going to go on for a little bit longer. I know one of the people online is where they're going off now because they're going to bed, JP, but they'll be joining us tomorrow. And they thoroughly enjoyed themselves, including you, Margaret. You've got a fan there. So what we're seeing is lots of changes going on, and what we do see is a cross Maiden Castle in the 400s BC, 500 BC, 400, 500 BC. There's lots of these four-poster buildings, which basically means that the four-poster buildings, these square four-poster buildings, these small dwellings, between the posts is 2 meters. So these are small buildings. Post holes are found across Maiden Castle and lots of other sites, right? So the purpose of these post holes could possibly be seen as small dwellings for animals, or actually structures that were probably grain storage silos off the ground. The presence of granaries suggests that the fort was used to control the area's food supply, right? Now, if you use the word control, right? Okay, controlling relationships, right? One person controls the other person to do what they're doing, right? But is it the same meaning, right? So say basically, you've got a field, right? And it gets damp in the autumn months, right? Because you're lower down. And then basically somebody turns around and says, right, actually, if you bring your grain here, right, and you can keep it dry, right? But there's a presumption that where you're taking the grain, there's somebody in charge. There's always the presumption that there's somebody in charge. So in other words, Margaret, right, you take your grain here because somebody's telling you to take your grain here, right? And that's your tax. Or are you taking your grain here, Margaret, because you partly built the site? I would like to think that your labours in building the site mean that you can take your grain here. And one of the 4 posters is for storing your grain, Margaret, and the other one alongside it is for storing my grain. Because we help clean out the ditches, Margaret. We also help cut down some of the timber to help with the rampart. Now, if it was the other way round, you take your grain here, right? Thank you very much, bugger off, right? So who then repairs and cleans out the ditches? Nobody. Who cleans out who cuts the trees down, which are no longer here? Where does the timber come from to help repair the ramparts? So in other words, I'm not talking about a communist society or a socialist society. I'm talking about a cooperative society. We know that cooperative societies did exist in prehistory, right? I don't know if you guys can remember my lectures on the Olmecs and the Toltecs and the Zapotecs, where there were Central American civilizations that we're getting clear evidence that people worked together in these types of communities, and they all had a sense of relationship with these monuments, because at the end of the day, these monuments are on land that you can see, right? They're on land that you've made a contribution, and your family, Margaret, has built this site. My family has built this site as well. We have put a lot of effort into this, right? It's our site, right? We have spent hours up here building this. We've even taken stone here to help with the contribution. And you know, this is all positive stuff, right? This is all really positive stuff. Now, at some stage, more and more people live here, right? Roundhouses are constructed here. Why is that? And I haven't got the evidence, but my notes tell me the following, and we actually saw this at Hod Hill last week. They start to organize the site into plots, right? Basically rows of houses of similar sizes. Now, it says here in my notes, okay, let's just get to my point. Where's the image of those nice houses alongside the rampart? There, right, good. It says in my notes that the people living here are those people who are elite, right? Those people are aristocracy, and everybody else is living within the landscape. I don't go with that. I really don't go with that. I just can't go with it, because it means that you're being supported. It means it's like a big pyramid structure where there's a few people at the top, and we've got to go. It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense. however, what we do actually start to go to understand, and when we look at the archaeological evidence excavated by Sir Morton Wheeler, right, is these buildings have got a lot more than just occupational usage. They're working metal on site. There's metal workers on site. Remember I said that? Sir Mortimer Wheeler interpreted burnt timbers as being evidence of the site's being attacked and whatever, right? And burnt down, everybody's killed. We don't find many bones around. The evidence of intense heat staining in the soil, right, tells us that they're metal working on site as well, right? And what do we know about metalworking Andy and timber Andy wishes he never said anything about the fire, right? If you have too many buildings in a site like this and you're working metal, right, there's a fire risk to the buildings around you. All you need is a spark on a sunny day on a roof that is thatched with reed that is as dry as anything, and it goes up in flames. So in other words, what we're seeing with these types of sites, if we're getting that evidence, right, bronze objects such as pins, jewelry, and rivets have been found on this site. Now, there is no local source for tin and copper, so the material is coming here from the southwest, the likes of Cornwall. Can I tell you something that do you know that gold? This isn't going off. This is actually the point, right? That gold object those two gold objects that I saw today, right? They were found at Dollarcothau, the gold mine in West Wales, right? Now, I'm going to ask Drina. Drina, this is a trick question, so get ready, right? If you find gold objects if you find gold objects from the Roman era at a Roman gold mine, right? Where are those Roman gold objects produced? Drina, answer the question.
No idea at all. They could have been made anywhere and taken there.
Yes, exactly. That was my point. That is exactly my point. That's what we said. Now, Drina, you've been with me too long. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Right. Yeah. When I looked at this gold today, right, and actually, there's two sets of gold. One lot of gold is in the museum in London, right, and another set of gold is from another hoard that was found in 1817, right. The two items that I saw today, right, and I handled them. It was great. I've even got my gloves. I'm hoping that I can sort of scrape some gold off the gloves. No, that's stupid. But anyway, so but the point is that we were all chatting away. There was two experts there, and it was myself and there was a volunteer, and we were chatting away. And I remember doing a little video, and that'll be on YouTube, by the way, the video, so you can watch that. Anyway, I basically said, well, just because this gold was found at a gold mine in the Roman era, which was a gold mine that was being worked in the Roman era, doesn't mean to say that the gold is actually from here. And we actually started nodding our head. And where can we remember something similar to that? Can you remember, guys, David, when we did the Mole Cape in North Wales, we basically said, right, the Mole Cape in North Wales is made of gold, right? And there's gold mines in North Wales, right, in the Bronze Age, right? But then it looks like the gold from the Mole Cape is actually from Ireland, right? And didn't use local gold in the first place. Just because it's found near where gold has been found doesn't mean to say that item is actually from there. And I think we're actually really learning something in archaeology now. We really, really are. Unless there's a mold, right? Yeah, there's a mold, yeah, and it matches the items. Yeah, they have been made locally. Fine, good, but we haven't got that evidence, right? So it's saying at Maiden Castle that it's more likely that the gold was reworked. Not the gold. Start again. Go away from the gold, Karl. You're obsessed with it. The metal objects may not have just been smelted there. They may have actually brought scrap metal there, and they may have melted it down. Right? They didn't need to go through the process of blank firing from basically raw materials. They could just take materials there and work them, right? And good quality ore could be found in the surrounding area. But the hill fort does not appear to have been a centre for iron production in this period. But there are traces, some traces, because of the staining on the ground, some possibility that maybe they did, right? Now, what we've also got is that the pottery produced for the area was made near Maiden Castle, not necessarily on the site, but pottery was made nearby, right? And what they're seeing as well, other pottery that have travelled 35 miles away to this site at Maiden Castle from Poole Harbour. So it'd be 35 miles away. That would have probably taken them about 2 days to get the material here, unless they took a water source that would have got you much quicker. So what we've got, this site is it's got really more interesting, right? These buildings have got really more interesting as we look at it. So this long range trade has been taken as evidence for increased relationships with other groups, right? And a sense of identities. Now, the point is, if you're trading peacefully, right? And these banks and ditches are not for defense, then they're for truly for giving people a sense of identity, right? That's the point. I remember I didn't do this analogy last night with you guys, but I can remember on Wednesday, there was a lady on Wednesday called Judith, right? And Judith basically said to Judith, "Have you got a wall? Have you got a wall around your garden?" And she said, "Yes." Right. Then I said, "Have you got a gate?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Right. Do you think that wall and the gate would stop anyone attacking you?" And she said, "No." Right. So why have you got a wall and a gate? She said, "It's like it's to contain me. It's my area, right? It's my sense of place." These some of my words now, right? And this is what these places are about. It's a sense of containment. It's a sense of it's our place, right? It's our area, right? It's who we are, right? Can you just bear with me a minute? Hang on. Oh, you got it. Yeah, sorry about that. There's somebody trying to get in. Right. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Right, back to what I was saying. So in other words, this goes on to the next place. So this you've got this area, this place, this containment, right? This guy Neil Sharples states that developed hill forts such as Maiden Castle could not be seen as a town and cannot be considered truly as an urban landscape, right? But it's a landscape of agriculture and storage, right? However, when we look at Khalifa Atrabatum, which is that site, which is south west of Reading, right? I love saying Khalifa Atrabatum, Silchester. I just say it, but the people like Barry Cunliffe believe that in that case, and maybe one or two of the hill forts, they may have actually developed into towns and settlements, an urban way of life eventually, but we will never know because Rome intervened. However, even before they could develop into towns, lots of them have been abandoned. So then there's that other thing. So what we're going to do, I have massively just continued talking, which is probably good. Maybe it's not. We've got a tiny little bit to go. We mentioned the Romans, we mentioned decline, we mentioned Sir Mortimer Wheeler, and then I tell you what we're doing next week, and we'll call it a day. So lots of people online, they've been talking about they've been talking about alignments, and we've got a new person online called the Pathfinder, and it's they've been talking a lot about Tartaria, and they've been talking about major changes in history, and they've been talking about flooding, right? Now, the one thing about all of this is that you know, these hill forts are a massive, intriguing, expansive place of knowledge, and we can only learn from them a little bit more after the break, and then we know where we're going. So here we go. So now let's see if there's any questions. David's disappeared into the darkness. Any questions from you, David? And we'll have a 10-minute break.
No.
Anything, David?
No.
Nope. Okay. Right, Andy.
No, no, thank you.
Right. Okay. Margaret.
If it had been for flooding reasons, all the banks and ditches, wouldn't it be evident today, flooding and whether it's worked or not?
Well, I've suggested that, but maybe not suggested it in the way. It's a sense of barriers, and it's, yeah, you are right. There's no real evidence to say that they were ever flood prevention things. But when you think about it, water was very much something that our human consciousness did think about. Remember, our prehistoric ancestors saw water with fear in Britain, right? Because one minute Britain's connected to Europe, right, and the next minute it's not. Right, and we would always fear water. Where you know what we used to say, that sailors couldn't swim because they weren't meant to fall in the water. Sailors weren't meant to swim, right? And where does that come from? And it happens to be British sailors, which is a bit odd. But anyway, or Andy could say it's all sailors around the world. But the point is, I think the point I'm trying to make is that we have got another way of looking at things in Britain. We're an island. Europe isn't, right? And the way we see our landscape is going to be different from anywhere else. And obviously you could say, oh well, it's ridiculous that flood prevention if you live on top of a hill. But then again, wouldn't it be great that water's in these ditches? Or maybe it's good that water's not in these ditches, or maybe they're good for sanitation, or there's all these different ways of looking at it, and it's just one idea of a number. So there we go. Right.
I just wondered if any of these hill forts have expanded into towns. Are there any towns built where hill forts were?
Right, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try and answer that question, right? And I'm going to really try and answer that question.
I can't.
And the answer is none.
No.
I think if you think about Elysee, the one that Vercingetorix was besieged by Julius Caesar outside Paris. If you look at something like that, maybe that would have developed into a town, or maybe it did, but it didn't, because they burnt it down. But I think the answer is quite simple. If you look at Old Sarum, right, the medieval people learned that it's not a good place to put a town within these banks and ditches, right? They're very dry. They're very they're not very good for agriculture, right? And it might be down to the fact that they're surrounded by banks and ditches because the water's being drained away. So the answer is no.
No.
But we can't say how things would have gone, because our history was cut in two. So we can't even answer that question. But the answer is not that I'm aware of. However, if we look at it a different way, right? If we look at it a different way, most of the most important towns and cities in Britain are built on places that the Romans built fortresses or colonii and had banks and ditches around them. We can only look at York. We can look at Londinium, London. We can look at Winchester. We can look at Hereford. We can look at Glevum, Gloucester. We can look at Exeter. All these places had banks and ditches around them, but that was in the Roman period.
Mm.
So I've gone against what I've just said because there's something else going on.
Mm.
And Caliva Atrabatum, when the Romans captured that, they did make that into a later city, but then it was abandoned later on. Silchester was abandoned.
Those
Right.
that maze-like entrance and exit is a bit weird. It's almost as if they're siphoning people in, you know, a little bit like a turnstile at the.
Why didn't you just go around the back?
Yeah, maybe they were checking people as they were coming in. I think they were for trading myself.
But the thing is, it would be that my God, you take it another direction. So the banks and ditches are like a trade sort of control,
Yeah,
and that's great. We're loving it. That is taking it another way. You
yeah.
know.
Like it just reminded me of the airport. When you go to the airport,
Oh
they
Christ!
send you along all these passageways, so you're not all rushing to the same place. They're
Yes.
controlling you.
Do you know the answer is right? If I do get some work in the States, right, I'm going to take my passport and I'm going to take my two mobile phones and my leads, right? I'm going to wear two shirts,
Yeah.
two sets of underwear, and I'm not going to take anything else with me.
Right. Yeah. Good plan.
And what I get, what
Easier.
I've already thought this. If I was working in the States, on doing a film, then I'd be earning enough, so I'd buy my clothes out there. So, when I finished, I'd just give
Yeah.
them out to people on the streets, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Exactly. Um, so right, we got to have a break in a minute. So, Adrina, quickly, anything?
Well, no, I was going to say the entrance seems very complicated. I can't think it's necessary.
It isn't necessary. It isn't. The answer is, why didn't the Romans have entrances like this if
Yeah.
they were worthy of defensive measures? You
Mm.
don't need all this stuff. The answer is line of sight, right? You've got you've got you you've got a wall. Forget about the towers a minute. You've got a wall. You've got a ditch, right? And beyond that, there's nothing, right? So you just focus on getting people to the ditch, and they fall in the ditch and they die. If you've got a bank behind that ditch, and then you've got a ditch and you've got a bank behind that, well, what is the point?
Yeah, quite.
Very odd.
Right, let's have a break now. I just realised I gotta move my sheep into the other field. So it's 9:29, right? And we've got to be back on at 9:39 if we're gonna finish this. So
Okay.
I'll be back. I'll
Like
be back.
Arnold.
I'll be back. I'll be back. Arnold Schwarzenegger. La 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 la.
That's it.
There's one thing I want to know. I want to know what Idris is happy about. I really, really do. You know, the thing is, right? It's just like I don't know what his problem is. You know what I mean? He turns up to my classes. He makes no financial contribution. Right? I'm just had enough. Do you know? I think the only reason, yeah. Well, look. I have never ever met Idris ever at all. Ever have I ever met him? Right? Never. I don't name drop about famous people I've met. Right. Do.
Go on then. Who have you met? Who's the most famous person that you met? Other than Princess Anne.
Princess Anne there.
Princess Anne. Yeah.
Hugh Bonneville Carter, who was in front of me the other day when I was filming. But that's nothing. I didn't meet him at all. I've never had a Hollywood A-lister clapping after I've done my filming ever. Do you know what? This is the only film I'm going to go to that that I'm in.
Really?
No, start again. It's the only film that I'll ever seen in a cinema that I'm actually in, right? And yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
When is this film coming out?
I don't know. I'm sure I won't let you know. I'm positive I won't let you know when it's out.
Will it have a premiere?
Well, I'm too low in the blooming thingamajigs to go to the premiere, but you know, never know. So right, okay, let's get started. So we got that there, Right, let's just finish this off. I'm just waiting for the kettle to boil, but we got to crack on. Hang on, I've got to turn the kettle off. It's just going to interrupt. Hang on. Okay. Oh, hang on. There's a horsefly. Oh, did I tell you the other day? I was Phil. I was I got stung on. Oh yeah, that was, you know about me getting stung by a bee, don't you? Yeah, that was last week. Right. Okay. Let's crack on.
Do you know
Let's crack
where
on.
you get bees from?
What?
My next door neighbour is having a beehive in his back garden, and I asked him where he gets his bees from, and
Yeah.
he said it arrives via Amazon.
Oh, go on.
Shut
Yeah.
up!
Wow.
Yeah, he gets a queen bee, and it arrives in a little tube via Amazon.
Yeah. Well, what the hell happens then?
Well, then, and it's impregnated already, and it produces all its little worker bees once it's arrived.
I had this image of somebody with a baster impregnating a mother bee.
Yes.
Right, let's just get away from that. Just please, let's just not do that. Right, okay. Let's just not go there. Right. Right, okay. Anyway, so I think it's absolutely fascinating when we're talking about these sites, and we're talking about there's a period that before the Romans that lots of them were abandoned. I think that's absolutely that's really interesting, because it's almost as if we want to have these sites up against Rome, and the Romans see these things and they got to besiege them and they got to capture them, and in most cases that's not what's happening, because they're already lying abandoned. You know, something had changed before the Roman era, AD 43. Um, there was a change. There was a contemporary change in material culture for the Britons, right? And what was happening? What was happening around 100 years BC, right? So it's 150 odd years before the Romans, give or take a few years, right? Suddenly, what's happening is people are starting to use coinage. Lots of these sites are seemingly slowly starting to be abandoned. Cemeteries, and how cemeteries develop, and you look at places like Wet Slack, and you think about how cemeteries are developing, and that's a stage, and you're talking about lots more craft industries and a lot more sense of independence, but you've got lots of trade coming in. And there's some people can argue that's a lot to do with the Roman Empire, and that's a lot to do with um, contact with other worlds, like people in the Mediterranean, not just the Romans, and people from Africa, and people from Scandinavia. So it's almost as if things are changing. So developing industries may have resulted in a shift away from the hill forts, and these places, and it's almost as if um your agriculture is changing as well. And we see something similar happening in the medieval period, right? So again, get your minds into this. It's about 100 years BC, right? These types of sites, people walking away from them, right? They had been used for all the things that we've mentioned before, right? But suddenly we got coins, and suddenly we've got industries, and there's different things going on with burials, and people are starting to think about other types of settlements, right? And then our minds start to go to the medieval period, right? Because in the medieval period, just after the plague, and we get to the 1350s, 1351, 1355, 1360, what happens is, because there's a lot less people around. I'm not saying that's happened in the Iron Age around 100 years BC, but it's a similar thing. People are agriculture's moving from um, agriculture's moving from cattle farming, and agriculture's moving away from um, staple crops like barley and wheat, and people are actually started keeping more sheep, right? And maybe something like that is also happening. Their diet's changing. You know, there's a lot more ruminant grazing, like sheep and goats. We don't really know what's going on, but something's changing. There's a change. There's a fundamental change going on in Dorset, as is the rest of Britain. There's a trend. There's a trend for the abandonment of hill forts, and what then happens, right? What then happens is that people are living at farmsteads, right, that don't have defences around them. And that is odd. You know, there's not these great farmsteads with defences around them. There's some farmsteads that have defences around them, but they've got it's things are changing. There's something very, very different, right? And you know, it's and what we do see around 100 years BC as well, at Maiden Castle, actually on the site, um, people are abandoning lots of the buildings and the four posters, and there's just random farming here. You know, there's just random things going on. And what we do see towards the birth of Christ is that some of the earthworks, some of the ditches are being filled in, right? Some of the banks are being slowly demolished. And again, that is very, very interesting. When Sir Mortimer Wheeler excavates in these red areas, and around where all the trenches are, the red bits of trenches and stuff, where Sir Mortimer Wheeler's excavating, right? He says that the Eastern Gateway is almost demolished. It's removed around 100 years BC, right? And it's almost as if people are living in that area where the old gateway used to be. Sir Mortimer Wheeler excavates houses, storage pits. There's an iron working area. There's obviously the cemetery as well. And when Sir Mortimer Wheeler's excavating, they find in that area on the eastern side 137 pounds of iron slag discovered in a 30-meter square area. So there's a lot of iron production going on, a hell of a lot of iron production going on. So that tells us suddenly 1 minute, if you want to think that these banks and ditches were used for defence, the next minute they're filled in and people do something completely different with them. The amount of ore required could not have been supplied by local sources. The iron is having to come in all the way from Kent. It's coming in from southwest England. It's coming in from Wales. Maiden Castle is one of the most important iron production sites in the later Iron Age. And you're thinking, well, hang on a minute. This doesn't make any sense. 1 minute it's this, and the next minute it's that. Then you've got these big banks and bloody ditches. People are living there. Then they're storing things there. Then they're doing this, and filling in the banks and ditches, and they're doing something completely different. So if they're doing that, and then some of the people living outside the hill fort have got little farmsteads, which they always had anyway, but nobody really cares about having banks and ditches around things anymore anyway. What's changed? So what we're seeing is that I know I mentioned this, but there's throughout the Iron Age, we struggle to understand in some areas what people are doing with their loved ones, how people in some areas of Britain we've got lots of burials, Iron Age burials, and in other areas of Britain we've got no burials at all, and we don't really know what's going on, right? But at Maiden Castle, again on the eastern side, that sort of that area there, that sort of you've got the red bits there and stuff. So we are talking about this whole area here, right? And we're talking obviously annotating. Hang on a minute. The areas where we're excavating is this area where there's the burials. When Sir Mortimer Wheeler excavated the famous burial sites, Wheeler's excavation on the cemetery in the Eastern Gateway revealed 52 burials. 52 burials in the Eastern Gateway, which had formerly been a ditch and had formerly been a gateway area. Only part of the cemetery was investigated, so the total number of burials is likely to be many times bigger. So suddenly people are being buried where the entranceway used to be. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. Because there's a different story being told. Somebody else is telling a different story, which we're only starting to understand. One area of the cemetery featured burials of 14 people who had died in violent circumstances. One had a spear in the back of their neck, which Sir Mortimer Wheeler interpreted as a war cemetery. But the evidence tells us now that lots of those burials were buried there over a much longer period of time. Right. So what we're going to do, we're going to quickly look at the Sir Mortimer Wheeler stuff now, and we're going to go to their area photography, and there we got these little excavations. You can see one of those old army huts there. Brilliant, isn't it? And look at the excavations. This is the eastern side where they got the excavation cemetery. So we did have just a little mention of this, right? So I did say that we'd mention Sir Mortimer Wheeler, right? And this is actually taken from the Ashmolean website, right? And it goes on as follows. It says, the Ashmolean Museum holds 2,000 aerial photographs taken by Major George Allen between 1933 and 1939. And some of them include the excavations at Maiden Castle, right? You can see the other excavations. Can you see there? You've got a bank barrow. That's the bank barrow there. There you go, the bank barrow. That big long tapering line there. There we go. That's bank barrow. But if we go back to the other side, and we look there, right? So some of these aerial photographs show Sir Mortimer Wheeler and Tessa Wheeler's excavations. Now, Maiden Castle, boasts the most impressive earthworks to be found anywhere in Britain. The daunting series of fortifications on the western side were designed to protect this community from something. And the other thing as well is when you think about it, if we want to take this even further, let's just think. This is in my notes here. If you think about this, all right, if you think about the whole thing, like really odd that these banks and ditches, if you want to go down the defensive thing, they're actually defending the Neolithic stuff, the Neolithic bank barrow, and the Neolithic causeway enclosure remains inside. So somebody's thinking, oh, we're going to protect our past as well. We're going to protect our heritage. Weird. Now, again, thinking like that, and maybe it's right or wrong. Although not the first to dig into Maiden Castle, the famed archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler was the first to conduct methodical excavations of any considerable scale at the site. Now, one thing I've not mentioned is the Sir Mortimer Wheeler excavations were of extremely high quality. They were methodical, they were well placed, and everything was done proper job. His interpretations are not necessarily what we'd like. However, the 4 seasons of excavation unwieldingly found Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and Roman occupation. And obviously what we do know is these excavated Neolithic stuff there and there. So we do find that the aerial photographs of the site really help us to understand what's going on at this site, right? It really, really does. And what we are seeing, right? What we are seeing, if we go to here, oh, forgot that right. Yeah, good. Over here, down there, right. That is the excavations that Sir Mortimer Wheeler's excavating the temple. So these are temple excavations. We've known about these since 1882 when Edward Cunnington excavated at the site. And when we start sort of really thinking about this site, understanding this site, and as he's excavating here, right, sites F and G, the eastern entrance. The eastern entrance was completely explored in 7 trenches from 1935 to 1937. The trenches F and G explored the 2 gate portals. Other trenches explored the war cemetery and the eastern fortifications. And what the excavations did were to understand the sense of dating, how deep and how well the banks and ditches were actually constructed. And then Sir Mortimer Wheeler found something very, very odd. Sorry to keep this to the end. What Sir Mortimer Wheeler found was that where you've got number 1, they found traces not just of a causewayed enclosure site, but they actually found evidence of a settlement, a Neolithic settlement in different localities across the Maiden Castle landscape. So that means that this is a site of incredible intrigue, an occupation of different levels, burials, people living, storage, metalworking. There's a lot going on. It's an extremely complex landscape, an intriguing landscape. So what we're going to do now, we're going to just get to the end now, and we're just going to call it a day, right? Let's have one of those. Oh yeah, Roman temple. Let's keep this on here because I think my last bits and notes are sort of about this. So what we've really got is that somewhere along the line, this site is completely abandoned, right? And what we eventually have is is that the Romans seem to connect with this site, not just when they're building this temple in the 300s, but they actually start to find they're actually starting to find where the eastern entrance is. Right, go back to the eastern entrance. Let's get one of these aerial views. Right, where the eastern entrance is. Right, they're actually starting to find Roman evidence and Roman military evidence as well. So it's really, really interesting that characteristically the Roman military come here. But we're not really sure what they actually did here. Now, back to Margaret's question. Just within about, I think it's about 2 miles away north of here. There's Dorchester, which is De Novaria, the Roman name for it, Dorchester, and you can actually see the remains of Roman buildings in Dorchester on the wall. Right now, the very interesting thing is that the Romans didn't build their new town here, right? They built it about 2 miles north of here. They built a brand new town for the local people to live at, which sounds very, very odd. But the Romans knew something that we probably know as well. Maiden Castle was too small for them to build a city. It was not the right dimensions. It just didn't fit in with the plan of a Roman city, so they did not build it here. But what they did do is where that little hole is. Oh, hang on. Right. Where that little hole is there, that square, that's where the temple is, right? They did build a temple here, right? And it became a very, very important site. And it's an area. There's a central room, which is 6 meters square, and this is very, very typical. There's other rectangular buildings associated with it. It might have actually been people, other priests, and so on, right? But for some reason, the Romans wanted to build a temple here. There was other activity here. And then the site, by about the 500s, was eventually abandoned until the medieval period. And it was just used for agriculture. So what we're going to do then, we're going to call that bit a day because it's got to 10 o'clock. But what I'd like to finally do is I'd like to mention that next week we'll be going to Garton Slack. And we'll be looking at this plan, and we'll be looking at a plan of an Iron Age burial site, right? You know, Iron Age houses in amongst Iron Age burial sites, Iron Age barrows, which are square. This is what we're going to be doing next week. Small Iron Age graves, right? So this is an area that has lots of burial, even from earlier periods. And we're going to discuss what this is next week, which is probably quite easy to work out. These are exactly the same type of metal object which will be used today, and we'll be looking at this next week. And I'm sure that David may have used one of these in his time. On that note, we're going to call it a day. Hopefully, we've covered enough there tonight, and your ears are burning. So on that note, ears burning. David, anything you want to say?
No, thank you.
Been an absolute pleasure, David. I look forward to seeing you next week.
Good night, all.
Bye, David.
Bye, David. Oh,
Bye.
and get well, David. That's an order.
Thank you.
Look after yourself, David. We'll be good to see you next week. Take care. Bye. Bye. Anything from you, Margaret?
No, I've got to go.
You've got to go.
Really good. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I'm glad you really enjoyed it, Margaret. And we've got to look after David and Margaret as well. So anything from you, Drina?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Okay. And finally, anything from you, Andy?
No, they're just amazing, though, the hill forts. There's just can be open to be so many ways of using them and interpreting them. There's still a lot more to learn from them, I think.
And if you looked at the plan, probably only 1/20th of the complete area, including the banks and ditches, have actually been explored at Maiden Castle.
It's massive, Maiden Castle, absolutely
Yeah.
massive, isn't it? But you
And
wouldn't.
there might be, yeah, go on.
I was going to say you wouldn't dream of attacking it because there's no point. It's just too big. So it kind of works in it as a defense, just as for what it is.
Yeah, and what are you going to gain out of it?
Yeah.
You're going to gain a few people dead, and yeah,
Yeah.
And it's also the point, Andy, right? I own a hill fort, you own a hill fort, right? Well, what's the point? You know, we both got hill forts.
I kind of think people kind of wander up there and think, oh, this is a nice place. It's quite well defended from the elements by the big embankments. We should build a house here. It'd be really nice. It's got a good view.
Yeah, do you want to do a swap, a house swap? You go to Hod Hill and we'll Banbury Castle. Banbury Castle's a round one. Do you like my round one? Right, we'll go there. That's where Idris is. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get one of those. I'm going to get a Kylie Minogue version. For every single lecture, I have Kylie Minogue.
Yeah.
Do you know, I do have a Kylie Minogue. Yeah, we won't talk about that. Well, anything else, Andy?
No, thank you. Fascinating. I love Vale Forts. They're really interesting places.
Good. And we've had quite a lot of people saying stuff on here as well. So
I think it's also interesting, just from what Margaret was saying about that report she'd come across about when the Romans came across, because there was a kind of a void and nothing was going on here. I think, this says actually that's completely wrong in Britain. I don't know about anywhere else, but completely wrong.
Yes.
So,
maybe they wanted what we were doing, and that makes that makes a lot more sense.
We know they were trading with us long before they came to stay. So
yeah. Do you know that there's one school of thought, and I've not really understood this, and I can't really understand it and articulate it. But there's a faction in British historical research, not archaeological research, that believe that in fact big chunks of the Roman invasion were actually a myth.
Oh.
And they want to argue that in fact, we were becoming extremely civilized, and we really didn't need Rome. Well, that's actually true. We really didn't need Rome, but the evidence of the invasion it's there.
it definitely happened.
There was one point with that theory, the actual invasion minute and that moment is very difficult to find. It's actually the evidence after that we can find.
Yeah.
Right. And it might be more integration than there is a destructive warhead, because most of the evidence looked as if it looked as if it's an integration, and it goes into this, that we don't have the same archaeology that we have in Tunisia for Rome. We don't have the same archaeology that we see in Nîmes or any of the aqueducts in the Pont de Gard, or any of the aqueducts in Spain, or you know what I'm talking about, Andy and Gina. We don't have that evidence in this country, and because it developed differently, right? And even though, banging your head against a brick wall and trying to prove that the Romans were never here is pointless. But the point is that I think the point is that there's more to say that there was more integration than there was forced integration, and this is a really good point.
Yeah, that is also clearly something of great interest to have put 5 legions here.
Yes, and a lot of investment.
Yeah, I don't think that was. I don't think it was really defensive.
No.
A lot of infrastructure went in, an awful lot. So there had to be something to take out.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, there had to be something to take out. Yes.
Other than the Norfolk gold, which clearly they took away straight away.
They actually all the Norfolk gold they removed, and that's evidence that they did.
For anybody online, it's an ongoing joke. We know there's no Norfolk.
Is it a joke? Is it a joke though? We haven't actually proved.
Yes, we did. No, there is no source of gold in Norfolk. or in East Anglia or in the southeast of England. But like we say, ironically, that's where it was all found. So.
And that works against what I looked at today, right? Yeah. It's like if the point is that the gold that I was looking at today didn't actually come from West Wales, right? Yeah. It's almost because it all went to Norfolk.
It just again shows just how much stuff was moving around from a very early period.
A lot.
Yeah.
A hell of a lot. And a hell of a lot is buried and lost, and it's just it's that for now until it's all found in that cave of Claire's.
Yeah.
Claire's cave. Claire's cave.
Yeah, she's going back up to Carlisle to dig again very soon.
You know what? Does she actually earn any money anymore?
No, not a lot because it's raining so much. But she inherited a bit, so she's been taking it easy. She's paid off a mortgage and things. So,
right, okay.
And she needs to take it easy. She's always been working 24, well, not 24/7, but every day. But
she's nearly 40 now, isn't she?
Yep, she is getting on a bit. She's not been physically not been very well, as in knees and back. And things playing up quite a lot this year, but it seems to be at the moment seems to have cleared up again now. That doesn't stop her going digging though in archaeology. So nothing stops her doing that. No.
When you're on an excavation with her, does she laugh a lot?
Oh yes, you can hear her the other side of the site. You know where she is. That never stops. Yeah. And she gets in with anybody who's of any interest straight away. She's very, very good at networking. You just stand back and then get introduced. It's good.
I was in a museum today, right? And basically it was done on the basis, right, that we had to make a contribution to see the find and whatever, archivist and all the rest of it, which I said, yeah, right. Anyway, the woman at the end, she said, "Oh, you've been here for 2 hours, right? We've got to charge you this amount, right?" And I just agreed, right? And a whole hour of that sort of 2 hours was me just entertaining them talking, right? And she felt so guilty. She felt so guilty for the fact that she charged me for entertaining them that she gave us a rebate. She said, "I'm awfully sorry about this. We've overcharged you." And I just thought, right, okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah. Yes. Here's an extra £5. Please come back again. Never mind. Be nice to be able to make money like that, wouldn't it? Just go around entertaining people about history.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. It's got to be done. It's got to be done. Right. I'm gonna be making tracks. Anything else from you, Andy or Drina?
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
My pleasure. And no doubt we know what we're doing next week. So we've got Gartland Slack, and we've got the we're looking at that grain house, that souterrain underground building in Orkney.
Jolly good.
My images. Okay, I'll see you next week, folks. Thanks for Andy, and thanks for that, Drina.
Bye, Drina.
I'll speak to you soon.
Bye.
Night, folks. Night. I'm almost finished my bloody tea. What are you looking for, love? Your clippy thing? Box with the leaves. I remember giving it to you. It's just like... Right, let's have a look on you. You found it, have you? What? Right, okay. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Done. 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 Oh, still online. Anyway, good night, everybody. Like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. And we'll be back on tomorrow, Wednesday at 7:30. Thank you very much. I'm just turning off the chat now on 1, 2, 3, off. Oh, no. 1, 2, 3, off. No, diolch yn fawr i chi, gwelwch chi eto. And don't forget to send donations online. The link is there. Buy me a coffee. And karl-james langford at outlook.com for donations. Diolch yn fawr i chi. Nos da.